to celebrate Dion's life. It's not a sad time, even though we feel sorrow, we're going to miss him, but he is in a better place. He was looking forward to going home to be with his Lord. At this time, I would like Daryl to come up and read the obituary.
Hello, everybody. It's with hearts full of sadness we announce the passing of Eric Dion on March 2nd, 2019. A free spirit constrained by the limits set by this world, he is now free to be joyful and dance. Sing and play bass to his heart content for his Savior Jesus. Proud Alberta boy, Dion was born in Peace River, where he became a musician. He spent his earlier years traveling the countries with his band Strut and Hang Dogs. Remember some stories about those ones. He formed a trail of friends across Canada and into the States because music, like Dion, knows no boundaries. As a young adult, he settled into Edmonton and area, eventually choosing Leduc as home. He spent many years working as a dispatcher for several long-haul trucking companies and made an impact on many of the lives he touched during that time. Dion lived a life to the fullest and had a gift of always being in the moment. He was giving of his time, his words, his gifts, and his friends knew that whatever he had was freely theirs as well. If he had taken a life motto, it would have been, how much is enough? I can see it now, just a little bit more. He loved his family above all else, and the world is a different place with the loss of our dear friend
Thank you, Daryl. Dion is survived by his wife Lorna, his sons Eric and Lindsay, and Lindsay's wife, and his mother. So thank you for being here to celebrate with them. And I know that many of you have already given several hugs and condolences and stuff. That's just awesome. The Word of God says, do not let your hearts be distressed. You believe in God, believe also in me. There are many dwelling places in my Father's house. Otherwise, I would have told you, because I am going away to make a place ready for you. And if I go and make a place ready for you, I will come again and take you to be with me, so that where I am, you may be too. And you know the way where I'm going. But Thomas said, Lord, we don't know where you are going. How can we know the way? And Jesus replied, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you have known me, you will know my Father too. And from now on, you do know him and have seen him. It was my privilege to get reconnected with one of Dion's best friends a couple weeks ago. His name is Brock Hetherington. And Brock couldn't make it today. He flew up a couple weeks ago so we could spend 4 or 5 days with Dion and Lorna and stuff. And Brock and Dion met here. And they were only here for about 3 years or 4 years before Brock moved on to the States. But they maintained a very, very strong and cool friendship. They were brothers in heart. And Brock can't be here today, but because of technology, he's going to speak to us on the video. So, Carter, can you start that for us, please? Oh, I should just remember, after Brock's thing, we're going to have a couple people. If you would like to say a couple words, short words, about some reminiscences about Dion and stuff, begin to formulate those now. And we'll have 3 or 4 people, if you want, come up and say a couple things. And I'll invite you. Okay. Carter.
Hi, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Brock Hetherington. I'm coming to you right now from Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. I wish I was there with you now. I was just there recently, and due to life, circumstance, I'm not able to be there today. But through the wonder of technology, I was able to make this happen. I used to be a member of Leduc Alliance Church 15 years ago, and that's partially how I got to know Dion. I got a call one day that a group of guys needed a drummer for something they were working on. So I showed up at this church, and this long-haired, gray-haired guy, probably in shorts, walked up to me and said, "Hey, I'm Dion. Are you Brock?" And the rest was history. There was just an instant connection, an instant chemistry, and when we played together, wow, it was pretty special. Well, I ended up being the drummer for the worship team at Leduc Alliance. Dion kind of coordinated the music, played the bass, and he coined a phrase called GOWT, G-O-W-T, guitar-oriented worship tunes. You see, Dion had an aversion to the heavy-handed piano leading that most churches did in their worship services, so he handpicked songs that were tailor-made for the guitar. So they had kind of a rockier edge to them. Every week, Dion would put together a CD-ROM that he would burn with GOWT written across the top, and it had the tunes that he wanted us to practice and learn for the week. You know, I still have some of those discs kicking around somewhere. I remember my wife found them one day and said, "What's GOWT? Is that some sort of metal band?" So I had to explain it to her. Well, that started a long-term and lifelong friendship. What can I say? When Dion asked me several weeks ago if I would speak at his funeral, I was humbled, honored, and frankly, didn't want to think about it. Who gets that opportunity ahead of time? But through life circumstances, we did. And of course, how could I say no? You know, Dion and I had a fast friendship. We became not inseparable, but we were together quite a bit. We just loved to hang out, play music, talk about Star Wars. We just had a great time. I got to know his kids. Lindsay can fill you in on some of those stories about his Rambo and the helicopter story. I'll let Lindsay tell you that one later. Then came the sad day. It was about 2000, end of 2003, early 2004, well, maybe midway through 2004. I accepted a transfer with my job that took me to the United States. I ended up in northern Kentucky, just across the river from Cincinnati. I'll never forget the day I had to tell Dion, and we dreaded that last day, and we tried to make the most of the time we had, but we both knew it was coming. The last day I saw him in Leduc, I think it was even at his house, I had 2 coffee mugs made, and I gave one to him, and I took one with me. On the one side is a smiling picture of the two of us laughing and having a good time. And on the other side, it says, "Best friends for life." I've treasured this cup for many years, use it all the time. It's a little faded. I kind of wish I hadn't put it in the dishwasher. And when I said goodbye to Dion, it was hard. There was tears, there was hugs. But I tell you what, we both know, and we both knew it wasn't the end. Well, we kept in touch pretty regularly. We would talk, a lot on the phone. This was kind of before the big onset of texting and whatnot, but we would talk. And the first time we saw each other again, we'd been apart for, well over a year, and Lorna put together a scheme to surprise him for his 40th birthday. As a present, she flew me up from northern Kentucky. And of course, how could I say no? And she waited till he was asleep. I had a late flight coming in. And then she came and got me at the airport and brought me back to their house. For those of you that know Dion and his sense of humor, and those of you that know me and know our relationship, this won't surprise you. You can imagine the look on his face when I crawled into bed with him, got under the covers, put my arm around him, and he realized, slowly but surely as he came out of his slumber, that this was not Lorna behind him that was spooning him. I remember as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he looked me in the face with that sleepy look, and he said, "No way. No way." Well, we got him, and I had a great trip. We spent a lot of time together, touring around Edmonton, seeing places that I hadn't seen, but mostly we had a good time just being together. We even played some music, and it was a great reunion up until the day I had to leave, come back home. And it was sad, and we hugged, said we loved each other. But again, we knew this wasn't the end. Well, over the years, we kept in touch. Sometimes we went, a couple of months without talking. But by this time, we had texting, and we would text interesting memes and funny things we would find, and just randomly brighten each other's day. One time I had to go up to the Okanagan to visit my family, and we were able to connect up in Banff and spend a weekend together. And that was fun. Those were those memories that you make with people that you never forget. We've got pictures from that trip that I'll treasure for the rest of my life. The next time Lindsay and Dion decided to come down and check out Kentucky and Cincinnati, and that was a lot of fun. We got to tour around. We ended up down in kind of central Kentucky on the Bourbon Trail, culminating in a distillery tour at Maker's Mark Bourbon. And I'm going to warn you, if you bought a bottle of Maker's Mark between 2005 and about 2015, I advise you to keep the seal on it and don't break the wax. Because as we were going through the tour, and I've got a picture of this, and I'm sure that Lindsay can show it to you later, Dion decided to put his finger in the massive vat of mash it was preparing to become bourbon. So I don't know which batch it got into, but I don't know if I want to chance it. Well, we had a good time. We toured Louisville, Cincinnati, all over northern Kentucky. Took them shooting. Had a friend of mine who's a federal air marshal teach him the ins and outs of firearm safety. It was a good time. But inevitably, we had to say goodbye. It was hard. We knew we'd miss each other. But again, we knew this wasn't the end. And of course, we kept in touch. From there, I had to move to Alabama. And careers change, life goes on, but Dion was always there. By this time, we had FaceTime. So we could stay in touch a little easier. We could see each other and have long talks and debate the latest Star Wars movie and whatnot. And that was great. Not the same as being with him, but it was great. We went and shared my divorce together. When I went through my divorce, it was hard. These things always are. And Dion was there with me every step of the way. He was a solid friend and someone I could lean on and bounce things off of. And, Dion was one of these guys that he always told the truth. He didn't pull any punches, and he was always honest, even when you didn't want him to be, honestly. Sometimes the advice he gave me was right on the money, but it was still a royal pain in my ass, I'll tell you that, because I didn't want to hear the truth. I wanted to do things my way. Like when Dion told me after my divorce, I shouldn't date for 2 years. I said, what, 2 years? He's like, dude, you shouldn't date for 2 years. Well, Dion has this way about him. If you've experienced it, you know. He's got this certain tone. When you're talking to him and you're telling him something that doesn't quite ring true or that he doesn't quite agree with, he'll listen. And then he'll look at you and he'd say, oh yeah? And just give you that stare. And then, of course, he'd follow up with some of his wisdom that Dion always spouted, which again was normally true and common sense, whether or not I wanted to hear it. So imagine 5 months later when I met my wife, and I called him up all excited. I said, Dion, I met this girl. She's a redhead. She's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, we're two peas in a pod. You would love her. She's wonderful. And I know you said 2 years, but what am I supposed to do, Dion? I can't unmeet her. But I tell you this, man, she's a Christian. She's a mom. She's wonderful. I wasn't looking for it, but it just kind of fell in my lap. And what am I supposed to do? I guess I'm going to have to just pursue it. Dion looked at me and said, oh yeah? Well, it worked out. And in March of 2013, we were married, and Dion gave me his blessing because we'd had many talks, and he got to FaceTime and get to know Lori, and they loved her as much as I did. They finally got to meet her. I was very grateful. In 2016, we were in Vegas for a trade show, and Dion and Lorna were in Vegas at the same time, and we were able to connect over at Caesar's Palace and sit down and talk, and they just fell in like they'd known each other their whole lives. But that's how Dion and Lorna were. You felt like you'd always known them. They were non-judgmental. They accepted everybody, and they loved my Lori, and they did, and it was great. And I wish we all could have had more time together. Speaking of Dion and Lorna, I can tell you this: they had a love for the ages. I've never met anyone quite like them, and their love was evident. They always stuck by each other, never said ill words of each other, and always had each other's back. This was never more evident until the last couple of weeks when I got to see Lorna show love in action with the way she cared for her partner and her husband. She took care of him. She nursemaided him. She was up all night. She did everything she had to do when the nurses weren't around. I mean, she did the tasks that nobody wants to do, but you do for the people that you love, and I never heard her complain. Never heard her say a negative word. Well, I say that, but when I was driving over one day, I think it was the last Sunday I was in town, I called her. I said, I'm on my way. Do you need anything at the grocery store? And she said, no, we're good, but just be wary. He's a little grumpy today. I said, well, we'll see. You see, Dion, when he started to get sick, and he told me about it, and this was several years ago, I was concerned, and as it progressed and got worse, I got more concerned, and he was constantly in my prayers. But as it got to a point where we knew that this was going to be, it wasn't probably going to end well, he made it very clear to me that he didn't want me to treat him differently. He didn't want me to talk to him like he was an invalid or like he was dying. He wanted me to be Brock and him to be Dion, so I made him that commitment. Now, it might have shocked some people, the way we talked about death, about illness, but that was me and Dion. I'll never forget, it was this past November, which was Thanksgiving down here in the States. I was coming home from a business trip, and I was driving, and Dion and Lorna called me together, which I thought was a little odd. And they told me they'd just come from the specialist, and it wasn't good news. That they basically told him that it had gotten to a point where there was nothing more that they could do, and they had to take him off the transplant list. And I said, so what are you saying? And he said, well, it's probably going to be about 6 months. And my heart sank, and I was devastated, and I just didn't know how to react. It was one of those moments in life that you just can't prepare yourself for. My best friend in the world, my brother, has told me that he's going to be gone before the end of next year. And the one thing I can say is he was calm as the day is long. He didn't complain. He didn't make excuses. He didn't say, why me? And that was Dion. He had this unwavering faith. He knew where he was going, and he just took it in stride. I'm sure he was nervous about leaving his family, but he wasn't scared of where he was going. So we discussed it, and I said, well, I guess I better get on a plane and come up there. And he said, well, no, I want you to hold off. I don't want you to have, typical Dion, I don't want you to have to make 2 trips. And I said, why would I make 2 trips? And he said, well, I'd like you to officiate my funeral. See, he found out that in 2007 I got ordained. And I'd done weddings, but I hadn't done any funerals. He said, I'd really like you to do my funeral. And I said, well, that's all well and good, buddy, but I'd rather see you when you're on this side of the world. So I'll be coming up. So we were kind of looking at March, maybe late March. And we talked about it. We would text and talk. Well, just a few weeks back, I sent him a text and I didn't hear back from him. About a day and a half went by and I still didn't hear back. So I called Lorna and I said, I didn't hear back from Dion. She said, well, he's not spending a lot of time on the phone. Things aren't really going well, Brock, and I just don't know that he's going to be here through March. I said, well, then I'm coming. So I got online and I made some plans and I booked a flight to come up there for the 22nd through the 25th of February, a Friday through a Monday. And Lorna and I decided that as much as we'd like for it to be a surprise, we really didn't want to surprise him. We wanted to give him something to look forward to. So we told him I was coming. He was excited. I was excited. Coming to see my buddy, my brother. Well, it was supposed to be the following week that I was coming. And on that Monday, February the 18th, I'll never forget because it was my 47th birthday. Got a call just after noon. Lorna called me and she said, Brock, Dion had a really bad night. The doctors have basically said probably hours, maybe days, but I don't know that he's going to make it till Friday. So I got on the phone with Delta Airlines and I changed my flight and I was up there the next day. I landed at about 10 o'clock. I came through customs, got my rental car, and I was at Leduc Hospital at 10:30. I walked into his room and he was asleep on the bed. Lorna and her mom were there and we said our hellos, and right away she said, Dion. And he opened his eyes. He saw me standing there and his eyes lit up and he smiled. And I said, what? I just traveled 12 hours all the way from Nashville. You ain't even gonna get up and get out of bed and give me a hug? Well, we all had a laugh at that one, and it was so good to see my friend. It was hard to see him like that, but it was so good to see my friend. Well, Lorna and her mom went home for the night so they could finally get some well-deserved rest, and I stayed with Dion in the hospital. We talked well into the night. He would nod off occasionally, but we talked and talked and talked, and we talked about the good old days, but we talked about the reality of what was going on. And believe me, Dion was confident in where he was going, and he showed no fear whatsoever. And there was a few little tears, and I got a little emotional. He said, I'm still here. Typical Dion, right? So about 3:30, I said, well, I think you need to get your rest. What I really meant was I needed my rest because I'd been traveling all day, and it was 4:30 in the morning to my body from Central Time. So he went down. He said, you're right. And he went to sleep, and I got in the recliner, and I fell asleep. Well, it wasn't 2 hours later, about 6:15. I'm on my back, and I hear, hey. I open my eyes, I kind of look up, and there's Dion. He's got his back of his bed propped up a little bit. I said, do you need something? He goes, you awake? I said, well, I am now, dummy. And he laughed, so I got up, and we sat there and talked, and we just spent time together. And I was lucky. I had 6.5 days with my friend, and that Thursday he was actually able to come home. And I was so happy for that because I'll tell you, his greatest fear was dying in the hospital. That's the only fear he had. He didn't want to die in the hospital. I remember one day he was talking about, here I am on my deathbed. And I said, wait a minute, brother, that's not your deathbed because that's not why you're dying. Well, he was able to come home. So the ambulance brought him home, and I helped the ambulance team hoist him up the stairs and into the living room and into his hospital bed that they'd moved there into the house. And we got him settled. And for the first time in a long time, from what Lorna told me, he rolled over on his side and fell asleep. And he had not slept on his side the whole time he was in the hospital. Well, He slept for quite a while. The trip home, even though it was only a 5-minute drive, took a lot out of him. So I went in the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, and y'all, I opened up that cupboard, and staring me in the face was his mug that he'd kept for the past 15 years. That's what our friendship was. That's just how we were. Dion was a very special person. You know, I never heard him say a negative word about anybody. He was never hurtful. You know, in music, when you're in a band or working with musicians, there's sometimes disagreements. But even then, he never tried to make anybody feel bad. He never tried to hurt somebody intentionally. And that was just Dion. The world needs more people like Dion. Well, on Monday, the 25th, it came time for me to leave, and I went over to the house, spent my time with him, and got to meet his buddy Jeff back from the old Strut days, which was great because due to our friendship with Dion, I instantly felt a connection with Jeff, and that's just the Dion factor. But it was time for me to head to the airport, and I looked at him and he looked at me, and I didn't want to leave. I really didn't want to leave. I told him that I loved him, gave him a kiss and a hug, and I left for the last time, seeing my brother this side of heaven. But we knew this wasn't the end. I'm going to miss his goofy laugh. I'm going to miss the way he'd call me up and say, "What's up, Broseph?" I'm going to miss our little inside jokes. I'm going to miss so many things about him. Speaking of jokes, if you get a chance, ask Lindsay to show you the pictures from our Northern Kentucky trip, because there's some I just can't share here, but they're funny and you'll get a kick out of them. But I'd be remiss if I didn't share this with you, and I'm going to read this. I'm going to put on my glasses because this is what Dion would want me to share, because this is the most important part. It's a story about Wynton Marsalis, the great jazz trumpeter. He was playing a gig one night in New York. And he was playing a soulful and mournful ballad called "I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance with You." At the pivotal moment of the song, as happens these days, a cell phone rang out. Well, the rude interruption probably should have killed the mood, and it probably would have for anybody else. After all, giants of the music world like him, they shouldn't have to put up with those kind of interruptions. I could hardly blame him if he would have walked off the stage, but he didn't, and after a few seconds, he did something amazing. Without missing a beat, he picked up on the tune of the cell phone's ring, and he incorporated it into the song he was playing. He performed variations on it, blending it with what he'd already planned to play, and then he drew the whole ballad back to its original theme. The result brought down the house. Marsalis transformed a rude interruption into a moment of glory. He didn't allow an unexpected shock to stun or silence him. Instead, he turned this setback into a comeback. That's what good musicians do. Y'all are gathered here today because life has been interrupted. The shrill ring of death has seemingly overcome the music and the melody of life. Phones rang around the country this past week when Dion died. The family's phones were ringing. They were getting texts, everyone wanting the news. Hearing and experiencing death's ring can make us angry, frustrated, scared, and hurt. We want to know who's responsible for this interruption. Death makes us wonder whether we'll ever have a ghost of a chance of understanding or getting back in tune, or of that feeling that we have with the music once again. But today we need to recognize something important. We need to recognize that God is standing at the microphone. The God who improvises a different tune, a variation on a theme. We gather today because we recognize that somehow God, the master musician, is able to take the ring of death and discord and turn it into life. That's really what resurrection is about. Jesus walked out of that tomb showing us that even death doesn't stop the music. The song goes on, perhaps a bit differently, more improvised, more subtly beautiful, but it goes on. You know, the death of someone close to us can force us to quit, or it can be an opportunity for improvisation, to find new ways of celebrating life amid tragedy. In Romans 8:28, the Apostle Paul put it this way: we know all things work together for good, for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. That's a powerful image. No matter how hurtful, how tragic, how unfair, or how out of tune we might feel, God can work variations on the theme of life within us and turn it into something beautiful. God's direction for us today is to follow his lead, to improvise, and to start something new. Music never dies. And because of God's promise of the resurrection, neither do the people we care about. No tragic ring of the phone can interrupt that. I know Dion believed this and would want each of y'all to know this too. He'd want you to know that you have the opportunity to choose death or choose life, but you can choose life over death through faith in the Lord. We all want to see Dion again. I know I do. As believers, we trust in the communion of saints and that death is just the beginning. Eternity begins now. If I could leave you with this one thought as you remember him, I know that Dion would want to say this to you. Just consider Jesus. Just consider him. Heaven's never going to be the same now that Dion's up there laying down the bass line. We're not going to be the same without him here in our lives. But I know myself, in many ways, I'm a much better person for having known him. I'll miss you, Broseph. The last words I spoke to Dion on this earth before I walked out the door, other than I love you, were, thank you for always being there. And you're still always going to be there. You're just going to have a different view. Because as always, we knew this is not the end. I will forever miss you, my brother, this side of heaven. But I will see you again. I love you. Thank you.
musicians to come up, and we have a mic here for you to be heard. So, a couple minutes, whoever would like to come.
Well, excuse me. I will keep this brief, as we were mentioned, but I'm Jeff. I'm the one that Brock was talking about. And I just wanted to comment that last time I saw Dion was that same day, and Lauren was there. And what amazed me most about him was the strength of character. He told me, he said, I'm not going to go out on my knees crying. He said, I'd rather be laughing. And that struck me as pretty powerful. So, I was in the band strut with Brian and Dion way back in the day. I was 16 years old, actually. And I quit school to go be a rock star. Look at me today. So, anyways, we were on the road once, and Dion, he just had the most amazing sense of humor. And I'm just going to wrap up my moment with one joke that he told me. I was the drummer in the band. I'm now a bass player. Obviously, I followed in his path. I was the drummer of the band, and he told me a joke one night. We'd had a couple of beers after, and he said, "Hey, Salas, how do you know there's a drummer at the door?" I said, "I don't know. Tell me, Dion." He says, "The knock gets faster, and he just doesn't know when to come in." And I thought, all right, sir, it's game on. So that's the Dion that I remember spending time with. Wonderful. And my final note on that would just be the sense of humor stayed intact. And God bless him, right? So, thanks.
Anyone else?
My name is Colin Bland, and I'm the guy that got those two guys together. But, Jeff, I gotta tell you something. I quit high school to become a rock star, too. Yes, yes. But the coolest thing about Dion was he really impressed on me that this is great, where he gets to be, where he's going, and that not to be afraid. And I've always carried that with me. And so I'm no longer a slave to fear.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Anyone else?
We're back years ago. Dion wasn't one that brought this song to me, as was stated earlier on. He always had these guitar-oriented songs that he liked. So this brings back a lot of memories of him playing with us on Sunday mornings, singing to the Lord. Great memories of the Lord will be here. So, it's for you, Lord, and for you, my band.
but I trust in you.
Truly was an honor and privilege to be with Dion as he led worship along with a couple of these guys a couple of times. It was awesome. We really appreciate your playing with you guys. Thank you. So what was important to Dion? You heard very services for that this afternoon. Obviously, he's been Morna, Eric, Mindy, Mom, and all of you who are his friends. I met Dion when my wife and I started to attend this church almost 20 years ago. Dion and I were involved in the men's group and eventually served as members of the board together. We spent many hours at the Leduc diner before board meetings, just getting to know each other, and talking about the church, and talking about each other, and talking about what was important. We really grew to care for God. He was very special, as each one of you know. But I'm kind of saddened that I don't remember his faith story. I don't know how he came into a knowledge and a relationship with Jesus Christ. How many of us here today sit beside or work or socialize with each other for years, but we really don't know each other's story? Do you know your best friend's story? Do you know your spouse's story? Dion had a fascinating story. I know this because of two things: his legacy, all of you here, and his relationships, the ones he made. Relationship with his Creator. His relationship with God influenced everything. Even his music. Even his jokes at times. Do you know his faith story? Do you know what Dion believed? So many people think they know Jesus. We all know Justin Trudeau. We can look up his wiki page, we can get a good idea of his likes and his dislikes, his ideals and his philosophy anytime. We can all say we kind of know Justin. We all have our opinion. But the thing is, does Justin know you? Many people in our world today say they know God. Does he know you? Without a shadow of a doubt, we know Dion knew God. Dion made a faith choice years ago at some point. He met Jesus face to face. He realized the written out truth in the Bible and the evidence of those whose lives were around him that told him their story, and the story of God and the story of Christ. As his time was drawing on earth was drawing to a close, Dion was not afraid. He looked forward to seeing his Lord, his Redeemer, his friend. He had absolute belief that he was heading for a transition of being. His time here among us was ending, but not his life. He wanted to be sure that we all, as we all gathered here, that everyone would hear God's story and have a chance to think and maybe respond. He wants to see as many of us as possible to be with him. So here's what he believed in a nutshell. Do you consider yourself to be far from God or close to God? I want to share with you a picture that changed his life and it helped me and many of us, to come near to God. Picture this. Everywhere we look in our world, we see brokenness. It's so evident. We just have to turn on the 6 o'clock news. Our world is imperfect. It's broken. And even ourselves, as individuals, we too are imperfect. We're damaged goods in God's eyes. So we're broken people. You see, when God created the world, this wasn't his desire to live this way. In fact, he actually had a perfect design in mind. Now the Bible says we went from God's perfect design to a brokenness because of sin. Basically, we all have a nice picture of what sin is. But it's basically selfishness, a desire to do things our own way. God had a plan, though, to restore us, which is why we learn about Jesus. Jesus is God. He came down into our broken world. He was perfect. He didn't sin. He had no sin. As he was perfect, he was willing to die on the cross to become our perfect sacrifice. He made the payment for our sin that we could have a relationship with God. Jesus lived, taught, had friends, but eventually, in God's plan, he went through excruciating execution for us. 3 days later, he rose from the dead so that he could restore us back to God's design. Now, Jesus tells us no matter who we are, we can get back to God. And he tells us to do just 2 basic things. Turn from our sin and living life our own way. And choose to follow Jesus and make him our boss, make him our Lord. If we do that, if we turn and follow, we can come to Jesus, and Jesus promises us to restore us back to God's design. And the best thing happens when we do that. All of God comes into us. He changes us. He motivates us. He helps us to do the next 2 things. Grow in our relationship with Jesus so it becomes stronger. And we do that by meeting together, fellowshipping together, at church, at home group, over coffee, at Boston Pizza. We just sharpen each other. We help each other to grow. And then once we've done that, we become more mature in Christ. We realize it's not about ourselves. He challenges us to go back into the world of brokenness, so that other people, more and more, can hear how they too can escape this broken world and become near to God. Do you know Jesus? Does he know you? Have you seriously thought about your eternal destiny? Everyone in this world is in one of 2 places. They can be in brokenness, or they can be in God's perfect design for their lives. Which place are you in? Dion wanted me to ask where you were. I'd like everyone to bow your head, close your eyes, and ask yourself, which world are you in? Which world do you want to be in? If you want to be in God's perfect design, and you don't know that yet, well, all the eyes are closed, I want you to raise your hand. You say, yes. I want to know. If you're in that place and you've never prayed this, I want you to repeat this in your own mind to the Lord. You've heard good news. God wants you to respond to him. You can talk to him by using these words like this. God, My life is broken. I recognize it's because of doing things my own way. I need you. I believe Jesus came to live and die and was raised from the dead to rescue me from my sin. Forgive me. I turn my selfish ways and put my trust in you. I know that Jesus is Lord of all. I want to learn about him and his plan for my life. I will begin to pursue a relationship with him from this day forward. In Jesus' name, amen. The Bible says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. In Romans 10:13 it says, for everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Dion believed this so deeply. If you're a believer and follower of Jesus, the question needs to be asked, are you being obedient to the task which we have been given? Which is, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And remember this, I am with you always, to the end of the age. Have you shared your faith story with your family, with your friend, with your spouse? How long will you keep it to yourself before it's too late? What is your faith story? We all have one. Don't let that chance fade away. As a matter of fact, I want to give you some homework. As we go and share our fellowship time, I want you to share your faith story. What was your life like before you had your confrontation with the living God? How did you meet God? What's your life like now? How does God engage in your life today? We're here because of one man's legacy in Christ. Dion had a faith story. What is yours? What will it be? If you have questions, I'll be available to talk after the service, or you can go to church of your choice here, or we have several excellent bodies of faith in our community. Or you can join a small group and really get deep. We have several of those in our church. If you want to be a little bit more discreet, we have all this information in the 3 circles which I described and follow-up materials to go through if you make that decision. They're all on our church website, and you're welcome to look at that. It's LeducAlliance.org. Just one last word. Dion is home. Lauren and family are going to go through a lot of life changes in the next few weeks. Feelings of loss, of loneliness, of sadness. Don't forget them. Look on Facebook. Lauren always posts cool stuff there. Go for coffee. Invite them over. Most of all, pray for them. And I'll have a photo remembrance. Some of Dion's interactions. I'll play that note card.
Said I was in my early 40s with a lot of life before me, when a moment came that stopped me on a dime. I spent most of the next days looking at the x-rays, talking about the options and talking about sweet time. I asked him when it sank in that this might really be the real end. How's it hit you when you get that kind of news? Man, what'd you do? And he said, I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. And I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. He said I was finally the husband that most of the time I wasn't, and I became a friend would like to have. And all of a sudden going fishing wasn't such an imposition. And I went 3 times that year, I lost my dad. Well, I finally read the good book, and I took a good long hard look at what I'd do if I could do it all again. And then I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. And I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. Like tomorrow was a gift, and you got eternity to think about what you do with it. What did you do with it? What did I do with it? What would I do with it? Skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. And I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I watched an eagle as it was flying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. 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 To live like you were dying.
Just Lord, thank you for your story. You want us to know you. You want to be with us in times of sorrow, in our accomplishments, in our lives daily. Lord, I pray that if there are any here today that would like to know you better, they would have someone close to them to share their story of faith. Of course, she's gonna get the last word. You like the family?
Dreams that you dream of, dreams really do come true.